Sarah Chen had always been the quiet one in the back of the room, the person everyone turned to when their computers crashed or when they needed someone to fix their broken phones. At 26, she had spent most of her adult life behind screens, typing code and solving technical problems that others found impossible. Her thick-rimmed glasses and oversized hoodies made her blend into any crowd, which was exactly how she preferred it. When the military recruiter first approached her at the technology conference in San Francisco, Sarah thought it was some kind of mistake. She was presenting her latest cybersecurity software to a room full of corporate executives when the woman in the crisp uniform waited patiently in the back row. After her presentation, the recruiter introduced herself as Colonel Martinez and explained that the military needed people with Sarah's unique skill set for a special operations unit. The offer seemed surreal. Sarah had never fired a gun, never been in a fight, and the most dangerous thing she had ever done was climb a tree to install a neighbor's internet router during a thunderstorm. But Colonel Martinez explained that modern warfare was changing, and technical specialists were becoming just as important as traditional soldiers. They needed someone who could handle electronic surveillance, disable enemy communications, and manage the complex computer systems that kept their teams connected and safe. After weeks of consideration and several conversations with her parents, Sarah decided to accept the position. The training was unlike anything she had ever experienced. While she didn't have to go through the same physical preparation as combat soldiers, she still needed to learn basic military protocols, weapons safety, and survival skills. The hardest part wasn't the physical training, though. It was learning to work as part of a team. Sarah had spent most of her career working alone, solving problems in the quiet comfort of her home office or a small cubicle. Now she was part of Alpha Squad, a 6-person special operations unit that specialized in high-risk missions in hostile territories. The other members of the team were all experienced soldiers who had served multiple tours overseas. There was Lieutenant Jake Morrison, the team leader with 15 years of combat experience. Sergeant Maria Santos handled explosives and demolitions. Corporal David Kim was their medic and secondary communications specialist. Private First Class Alex Thompson served as their scout and reconnaissance expert. Staff Sergeant Robert Jackson was their heavy weapons specialist and the team's unofficial comedian. At first, the integration was awkward. The other team members were polite but distant, unsure how to relate to someone whose biggest concern used to be whether the office coffee machine was working properly. During their first training exercises, Sarah felt like she was constantly in the way, stumbling through military procedures that the others had mastered years ago. She could hear them whispering among themselves, wondering if having a civilian tech specialist was really necessary, or if it would just slow them down when things got dangerous. But slowly, as the weeks turned into months, Sarah began to prove her worth. During a training simulation in the Nevada desert, when the team's primary communication system failed due to an unexpected electromagnetic pulse, Sarah managed to jury-rig a working radio system using spare parts and her laptop. When they were tasked with infiltrating a mock enemy facility, Sarah's ability to hack into security systems and disable alarms made the mission possible. She could analyze satellite imagery and identify patrol patterns that even experienced soldiers might miss. The breakthrough moment came during a particularly challenging training exercise. The team was supposed to locate and extract a high-value target from a simulated enemy compound, but everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Their insertion point was compromised, their backup communications failed, and they found themselves separated and surrounded by hostile forces played by other military units. While the rest of the team was pinned down by simulated enemy fire, Sarah managed to use her technical skills to hack into the exercise's computer system and provide real-time intelligence about enemy positions. More importantly, she discovered that the exercise controllers had made an error in their programming that would have led to the team failing the mission despite perfect execution. Sarah quietly fixed the problem and guided her teammates to safety without anyone except the team knowing what had happened. Lieutenant Morrison was impressed not just by her technical abilities, but by her quick thinking and her loyalty to the team. From that point forward, Sarah was no longer seen as the outsider who didn't belong. The team began to rely on her expertise and trust her judgment. Sergeant Santos started asking for her input on mission planning. Corporal Kim taught her basic medical procedures that might be useful in the field. Private Thompson showed her how to move quietly and observe without being seen. Staff Sergeant Jackson even started including her in his endless stream of military jokes and stories. As their training intensified, and they prepared for their first real deployment, Sarah found herself changing in ways she had never expected. She was still the same person who loved solving complex technical problems, but she was also becoming someone who could think quickly under pressure and make life or death decisions. She learned to shoot accurately with both rifles and handguns, though she hoped she would never need to use those skills in actual combat. The team's first deployment was to a region where intelligence gathering was more important than direct combat. Sarah's job was to establish and maintain secure communications, monitor enemy radio traffic, and provide technical support for the team's equipment. It was exactly the kind of work she was trained for, and she was confident in her abilities. But as they prepared to leave for their mission, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her real test was still coming. All the training in the world couldn't fully prepare someone for the reality of being in a dangerous situation where people were actually trying to kill you. She had proven she could handle the technical aspects of military operations, but she had never been tested when the bullets were real and the stakes were life and death. The night before their deployment, as she was doing final checks on her equipment, Lieutenant Morrison approached her. He told her that he had initially been skeptical about having a civilian on the team, but that she had earned her place through hard work and dedication. He also warned her that their upcoming mission might be more dangerous than the intelligence report suggested, and that she needed to be prepared for anything. Sarah nodded and assured him that she was ready, but privately, she wondered if anyone could ever really be ready for combat. All she could do was trust in her training, rely on her teammates, and hope that her technical skills would be enough to keep everyone safe when the mission began. The helicopter touched down in the pre-dawn darkness, its rotors kicking up clouds of dust that stung Sarah's eyes despite her protective goggles. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, a harsh terrain of rocky hills and sparse vegetation that looked nothing like the comfortable suburban neighborhood where she had grown up. As Alpha Squad gathered their equipment and prepared to move out, Sarah double-checked her technical gear one final time, ensuring that every cable was secure and every device was functioning properly. Their mission was supposed to be straightforward. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value terrorist leader was using a remote compound as a meeting point for planning attacks against civilian targets. The team's job was to establish surveillance, gather electronic intelligence, and wait for backup units to arrive for the actual capture operation. Sarah's role was to set up monitoring equipment that could intercept communications and provide real-time intelligence about the target's activities. The compound was located in a valley between two ridges, about 8 miles from their insertion point. The plan was to approach during the early morning hours when visibility was limited, establish a hidden observation post on the northern ridge, and begin surveillance operations. According to satellite imagery, the compound consisted of several buildings surrounded by a high wall, with guards posted at regular intervals. The intelligence suggested that there were approximately 20 to 30 people at the location, mostly guards and support personnel. As they moved through the darkness, Sarah was struck by how different everything felt compared to their training exercises. The weight of her equipment seemed heavier. The terrain was more challenging than any obstacle course, and there was an underlying tension that hadn't existed during simulations. Every shadow could potentially hide an enemy. Every sound might indicate that they had been discovered. She found herself grateful for all those hours of physical training that had initially seemed unnecessary for a technical specialist. Lieutenant Morrison kept the team moving at a steady pace, using hand signals to communicate and maintain operational silence. Sarah had memorized all the tactical signals during training, but using them in actual field conditions required a level of concentration she hadn't expected. She was responsible for carrying not only her personal equipment, but also several pieces of sensitive electronic gear that were essential for the mission's success. After 3 hours of careful movement through the rocky terrain, they reached their planned observation position. The location provided an excellent view of the compound while keeping them hidden from anyone below. Sarah immediately began setting up her equipment, connecting satellite communication links, electronic surveillance devices, and computer systems that would allow them to monitor the target location. Working in the darkness with only minimal lighting was challenging, But Sarah had practiced these procedures hundreds of times during training. Within 30 minutes, she had established secure communications with their command center and began intercepting radio traffic from the compound. The electronic intelligence was immediately valuable. Sarah could monitor conversations between the guards, track the movement of vehicles in and out of the compound, and even access some of the facility's internal security systems. The first day of surveillance went exactly according to plan. Sarah's equipment provided detailed intelligence about the compound's daily routines, the number of people present, and their security procedures. She identified the likely location of the high-value target and confirmed that he was indeed using the facility for meetings with other terrorist operatives. The information was transmitted back to command, and they were told to maintain surveillance until backup units could arrive for the capture operation. During the second day, Sarah noticed something unusual in the electronic traffic she was monitoring. There were several encrypted communications that didn't match the normal patterns she had observed. The encryption was sophisticated, unlike the relatively simple codes that the guards had been using for routine communications. When she brought this to Lieutenant Morrison's attention, he decided to extend their surveillance to try to decode these messages. Sarah worked throughout the night, using her technical skills to break through the encryption. What she discovered was alarming. The intercepted communications revealed that the terrorist group was aware they were under surveillance and were planning to relocate the following morning. Even worse, they had detected some kind of military presence in the area and were preparing to send out search teams to locate and eliminate any hostile forces. The situation had suddenly become much more dangerous. Instead of being hidden observers watching an unsuspecting target, Alpha Squad was now potentially being hunted by a larger and more organized enemy force than they had originally expected. Lieutenant Morrison immediately contacted command to request instructions, but the response was not what they had hoped for. The backup units that were supposed to arrive for the capture operation had been delayed due to mechanical problems with their aircraft, and it would be at least another 24 hours before they could reach the area. Command gave Alpha Squad two options. They could withdraw immediately and abandon the mission, or they could maintain their position and continue surveillance despite the increased risk. The decision was ultimately left to Lieutenant Morrison as the team leader, but he consulted with each team member before making the choice. The intelligence they had gathered was too valuable to lose, and there was still a chance that they could complete the mission if they were careful and maintained their concealment. Sarah found herself in the strange position of having a vote in a decision that could determine whether they lived or died. During all her years working in technology, the biggest risk she had ever faced was the possibility of losing important data or having a computer system crash at an inconvenient time. Now she was being asked to help decide whether to stay in a position where armed terrorists were actively searching for them. Despite her fear, Sarah voted to stay. She believed that her technical equipment could give them an advantage in detecting approaching enemies, and she was confident that her skills would be essential if they encountered any electronic countermeasures. The rest of the team agreed, and they prepared to defend their position while continuing the surveillance mission. As the third day began, Sarah's equipment detected increased radio traffic indicating that search teams were indeed being organized. She could track their approximate locations and movements, which would be crucial for the team's survival. But she also realized that their hidden observation post was no longer as secure as they had originally believed. The enemy was getting closer, and it was only a matter of time before they would be discovered. The technical specialist who had joined the military to work safely behind computer screens now found herself in the middle of a situation that could turn into a life-or-death combat scenario at any moment. All her training and preparation were about to be tested in ways she had never imagined when she first accepted the position with Alpha Squad. The attack came without warning just after dawn on the fourth day. Sarah was monitoring her equipment when her electronic surveillance systems detected multiple vehicles approaching their position from 3 different directions. She immediately alerted Lieutenant Morrison, but before the team could react, the hillside erupted in gunfire and explosions. The enemy had found them and they were completely surrounded. The first few minutes were chaos. Sarah had never experienced anything like the overwhelming noise and confusion of actual combat. Bullets whistled overhead, striking the rocks around their position and sending fragments flying in all directions. The sound of automatic weapons fire was deafening, punctuated by the explosions of grenades and rocket-propelled projectiles that the enemy was using to try to dislodge them from their defensive position. Lieutenant Morrison shouted orders over the noise, directing the team to defensive positions among the rocks. Sergeant Santos was returning fire with her rifle while simultaneously calling for air support on the radio. Corporal Kim was treating a wound that Staff Sergeant Jackson had sustained from flying rock fragments. Private Thompson was using his sniper rifle to engage targets on the eastern approach. Everyone had a job to do, and they were all doing it with the calm professionalism that came from years of training and experience. Everyone except Sarah. She found herself crouched behind a large boulder, paralyzed by the intensity of the situation. All her technical training had prepared her to handle equipment failures and communication problems, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of people actively trying to kill her. The weapons training she had received suddenly seemed inadequate when faced with the prospect of actually shooting at another human being. But as the firefight continued, Sarah realized that her technical equipment might be the key to their survival. Her surveillance systems were still operational, and she could track the enemy's movements in real time. She forced herself to focus on the screens of her devices, using them to provide intelligence about enemy positions to her teammates. She could see that they were facing a much larger force than anticipated, with at least 60 enemy fighters approaching from multiple directions. The situation was desperate. Alpha Squad was outnumbered 10-1, pinned down in a defensive position with limited ammunition and no immediate hope of rescue. The air support that Sergeant Santos had requested was at least 30 minutes away, and it was unclear if they could hold their position that long against such overwhelming odds. Lieutenant Morrison was doing his best to coordinate their defense, but even his experience and leadership skills couldn't overcome the basic math of 6 people against 60. That's when Sarah noticed something important on her electronic monitoring equipment. The enemy forces were using sophisticated radio communications to coordinate their attack, and she could intercept and analyze their signals. More importantly, she realized that she might be able to disrupt their communications or even turn their own technology against them. During her civilian career, she had specialized in cybersecurity, which included understanding how to exploit weaknesses in electronic systems. Working frantically while bullets flew overhead, Sarah began analyzing the enemy's communication protocols. She discovered that they were using a relatively simple encryption system that she could break with the right software. Within minutes, she was not only listening to their tactical communications, but beginning to understand their attack plan. The enemy commander was coordinating a 3-pronged assault designed to overwhelm Alpha Squad's position through sheer numbers and firepower. But Sarah also identified a weakness in their approach. The enemy forces were relying heavily on their radio communications to coordinate the complex attack. If she could disrupt those communications, their organized assault would quickly become a confused and disorganized advance that Alpha Squad would have a much better chance of repelling. Using her laptop and specialized software, Sarah began launching electronic attacks against the enemy's communication system. She sent false commands that caused confusion among their units. She jammed critical radio frequencies at key moments during their advance. Most importantly, she began feeding false information into their communication network, making it appear that Alpha Squad had reinforcements arriving from directions where no help was actually coming. The effect was almost immediate. Sarah could hear the confusion in the enemy radio traffic as unit commanders received conflicting orders and contradictory information about the tactical situation. Their coordinated advance began to falter as different groups received different instructions about where to attack and when to move. Some units stopped advancing entirely, waiting for clarification. That never came because Sarah was intercepting and altering the messages from their command center. Lieutenant Morrison quickly recognized what was happening and began adjusting Alpha Squad's defensive strategy to take advantage of the enemy's confusion. Instead of simply trying to hold their position against overwhelming odds, they could now exploit the gaps that were appearing in the enemy's attack formation. He directed his team members to focus their fire on specific targets that Sarah identified through her surveillance equipment. The turning point came when Sarah managed to completely take control of the enemy's radio network. Instead of just disrupting their communications, she could now send false orders directly to their units. She began directing enemy forces away from Alpha Squad's position, telling them that the target had been located in completely different areas. She sent orders for some units to withdraw and regroup, claiming that they were needed elsewhere for a higher priority mission. Within an hour, the organized assault had completely fallen apart. Enemy units were scattered across the hillside, many of them moving in the wrong directions based on the false orders they had received. Some groups were so confused that they had stopped advancing entirely and were waiting for new instructions that would never come. What had started as a coordinated attack by 60 trained fighters had become a disorganized collection of small groups that no longer posed a serious threat to Alpha Squad's position. But Sarah's work was far from over. She realized that she could use her control of the enemy communication system to do more than just defend their position. She could actually turn the enemy's own forces against each other by sending conflicting orders and creating the impression that different units were hostile to each other. It was a complex psychological operation that required her to understand not just the technical aspects of their communication system, but also the tactical thinking of their commanders. As the morning progressed, Sarah orchestrated an elaborate deception that convinced several enemy units that they were under attack by their own forces. She sent radio messages indicating that certain groups had been infiltrated by enemy agents and were no longer trustworthy. She created false reports of friendly fire incidents that made different units suspicious of each other. The result was exactly what she had hoped for. The enemy forces began engaging each other. Instead of focusing on Alpha Squad, the young woman who had never fired a shot in anger was single-handedly turning a desperate, defensive situation into a tactical victory through nothing but her technical skills and her understanding of electronic warfare. But she was about to discover that her real test was just beginning, and that sometimes even the most sophisticated technology couldn't substitute for the most basic military skill of all, the ability to fight. By midday, Sarah's electronic warfare tactics had successfully scattered most of the enemy forces, but a core group of approximately 20 fighters had figured out what was happening. Their commander, a seasoned veteran who had survived multiple conflicts, recognized that their communications were compromised and ordered his remaining men to switch to backup radios on different frequencies. More dangerously, he decided to lead a direct assault on Alpha Squad's position without relying on radio coordination at all. Sarah watched through her surveillance equipment as this smaller but more disciplined group began advancing up the hillside in a coordinated formation that didn't depend on electronic communications. They were using hand signals and predetermined tactical movements that her technical skills couldn't disrupt. For the first time since the battle began, she felt truly helpless. All her sophisticated equipment and hacking abilities were useless against an enemy that had simply decided to ignore modern technology and rely on basic military tactics. Lieutenant Morrison quickly assessed the new threat and realized that their defensive position was about to be overrun. The remaining enemy fighters were all experienced soldiers who knew how to assault a fortified position, and Alpha Squad was running dangerously low on ammunition after hours of continuous fighting. He made the difficult decision to abandon their observation post and attempt to escape before the enemy could complete their assault. The withdrawal was carefully coordinated, with each team member covering the others as they moved to a secondary position further up the ridge. Sarah found herself carrying not only her personal equipment, but also critical intelligence data that couldn't be left behind for the enemy to discover. The weight of the gear, combined with the physical stress of moving quickly across difficult terrain while under fire, pushed her to her physical limits. As they moved through the rocky landscape, Sarah's surveillance equipment continued to provide valuable intelligence about enemy movements. She could track the pursuing forces and warn her teammates about potential ambush points or areas where they might be most vulnerable. But she also realized that the enemy was gaining ground rapidly, and it was only a matter of time before they would be caught in the open, where their small numbers would be an insurmountable disadvantage. The new defensive position that Lieutenant Morrison had chosen was tactically sound but couldn't be held indefinitely. It was located among a cluster of large boulders that provided good cover, but it also limited their fields of fire and potential escape routes. Sarah set up her equipment quickly, hoping to regain some advantage through electronic warfare. But the enemy's decision to minimize their use of radio communications had effectively neutralized her most powerful capability. The second assault began just as Sarah finished establishing communications with their command center. The enemy approached from multiple angles, using the terrain for cover and advancing in short rushes that made them difficult targets. This time there was no confusion or hesitation in their movements. They had learned from their earlier failures and were executing a textbook infantry assault against a prepared, defensive position. Alpha Squad fought with the professionalism and skill that came from years of training and experience. But the mathematics of the situation were becoming increasingly unfavorable. Staff Sergeant Jackson's earlier wound was limiting his effectiveness, and Corporal Kim was running low on medical supplies. Sergeant Santos had exhausted most of her explosive devices during the initial defense, and Private Thompson was down to his last few rounds of sniper ammunition. Sarah found herself in the surreal position of being the only team member whose capabilities were still at full strength, simply because she hadn't been required to expend ammunition or supplies in the same way as the others. But her technical skills seemed increasingly irrelevant as the enemy closed in for what appeared to be the final assault. All the computer expertise in the world couldn't stop bullets or create ammunition out of thin air. That's when Sarah noticed something that the others had missed. Her surveillance equipment was detecting a large group of enemy fighters approaching from the east, but there was something unusual about their electronic signatures. After analyzing the data more carefully, she realized that this wasn't another enemy unit at all. The electronic signatures matched those of friendly forces, and the tactical movement patterns were consistent with standard military rescue operations. The backup units that had been delayed were finally arriving, but they were approaching the battle area without knowing the exact location of Alpha Squad or the current tactical situation. Sarah quickly established radio contact with the incoming friendly forces and began providing them with real-time intelligence about enemy positions and the location of her own team. For the first time in hours, she felt like her technical skills were making a meaningful contribution to their survival. But coordinating a rescue operation in the middle of an active firefight required split-second timing and precise communication. Sarah had to simultaneously track enemy movements, guide friendly forces to the correct location, and ensure that Alpha Squad didn't accidentally engage their own rescue team in the confusion of battle. It was the most complex multitasking challenge she had ever faced, requiring her to use every aspect of her technical training while under the extreme stress of combat conditions. The enemy commander recognized the danger as soon as the first friendly helicopters appeared on the horizon. He knew that his opportunity to eliminate Alpha Squad was rapidly disappearing, and he ordered his remaining fighters to launch a final desperate assault on their position. The next few minutes would determine whether Sarah and her teammates would survive long enough for the rescue forces to reach them as enemy fighters charged up the hillside in a last-ditch attempt to overrun their position. Sarah found herself doing something she had never imagined when she first joined the military. She picked up her rifle, aimed at the approaching enemies, and began to fire. All the weapons training that had seemed so abstract and theoretical suddenly became very real and very necessary. The rifle felt strange in her hands after hours of working with keyboards and electronic devices, but her training took over. She aimed carefully, squeezed the trigger gently, and watched as her first shot found its target, then her second, then her third. Each shot was deliberate and precise, just as she had been taught during countless hours on the training range. But this time the targets weren't paper silhouettes or electronic displays. They were real people who were trying to kill her and her teammates. Sarah discovered something about herself in those moments that she had never known existed. Beneath the quiet exterior of the computer specialist was someone who could remain calm under pressure and make life or death decisions without hesitation. Her technical background had given her an analytical mind that could quickly assess targets and calculate firing solutions even in the chaos of combat. She might not have had the same combat experience as her teammates, but she had something equally valuable: the ability to think clearly when everything around her was falling apart. As the rescue helicopters moved closer and enemy resistance began to collapse, Sarah continued to provide covering fire for her teammates, while simultaneously coordinating the extraction operation through her radio equipment. She was functioning as both a combat soldier and a technical specialist, switching seamlessly between roles as the situation demanded. The shy computer programmer who had never hurt anyone in her life was proving that she could be just as deadly as any traditional warrior when the circumstances required it. The rescue helicopters were still 2 minutes away when Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Through her surveillance equipment, she detected a large group of enemy reinforcements approaching from the south, moving fast and heading directly toward the landing zone where the helicopters were planning to extract Alpha Squad. The incoming friendly forces had no idea they were flying into an ambush that could result in the loss of both the rescue aircraft and everyone aboard them. Sarah immediately tried to contact the helicopter pilots to warn them about the threat, but their radio communications were being jammed by sophisticated electronic warfare equipment that the enemy reinforcements had brought with them. She could see the disaster unfolding in real time through her monitoring systems, but she couldn't do anything to prevent it using conventional communication methods. The situation required immediate action and creative thinking. Sarah realized that she might be able to use the enemy's own electronic jamming equipment against them by redirecting their jamming signals to create a communication window with the helicopters. It was a complex technical procedure that would require her to hack into the enemy's electronic warfare systems while simultaneously maintaining defensive fire against the fighters, who were still trying to overrun their position, working with one hand on her rifle and the other on her laptop computer. Sarah began the most challenging multitasking operation of her life. She had to track enemy movements through her surveillance equipment, maintain accurate rifle fire to support her teammates, and execute sophisticated electronic countermeasures against enemy jamming systems. Any mistake in any of these tasks could result in the death of everyone involved in the rescue operation. The technical aspects of breaking through the enemy's electronic warfare defenses were incredibly complex, requiring her to analyze signal patterns, identify vulnerabilities, and exploit weaknesses in real time while under extreme stress. But Sarah's years of experience in cybersecurity had prepared her for exactly this type of challenge. She approached the enemy's jamming system like any other computer security problem, looking for backdoors and programming flaws that she could exploit. After 90 seconds of intense work, Sarah managed to create a brief communication window with the lead helicopter pilot. She had less than 30 seconds to provide a complete tactical briefing about the enemy ambush before the jamming system would adapt to her countermeasures and close the communication channel again. Speaking rapidly but clearly, she transmitted the exact coordinates of the enemy reinforcements, their estimated strength, and recommended attack approaches that would neutralize the threat while avoiding friendly fire incidents. The helicopter pilots immediately understood the gravity of the situation and adjusted their approach accordingly. Instead of landing in the original extraction zone, they coordinated a tactical assault on the enemy reinforcements while simultaneously providing air support for Alpha Squad's position. Sarah watched through her surveillance equipment as the rescue helicopters transformed from vulnerable transport aircraft into deadly attack platforms, engaging the enemy forces with precision strikes that quickly turned the tide of the entire battle. But the enemy wasn't finished yet. The remaining fighters around Alpha Squad's position launched a final desperate assault, apparently hoping to kill or capture the team before the helicopters could complete the rescue operation. Sarah found herself in the middle of the most intense firefight she had ever experienced, with enemy soldiers advancing to within 50 meters of their defensive position. This was the moment when all of Sarah's training and natural abilities came together in a way that surprised even her. She discovered that her analytical mind, which had always been her greatest strength in solving technical problems, was equally valuable in combat situations. She could quickly assess the tactical situation, identify the most dangerous threats, and engage targets with the same methodical precision that she had once applied to debugging computer code. Her rifle shots were carefully aimed and devastatingly effective. Each bullet found its target because Sarah approached shooting the same way she approached any other problem-solving task. She analyzed wind conditions, calculated distances, and accounted for target movement with the same attention to detail that she had once used for writing software. The difference was that now the consequences of making a mistake were measured in lives rather than system crashes. As the battle reached its climax, Sarah noticed that one enemy fighter had managed to get close enough to throw a grenade into their defensive position. Without thinking, she dropped her rifle and tackled Lieutenant Morrison, pushing him behind cover just as the explosive device detonated. The blast threw both of them against the rocks, leaving Sarah temporarily stunned and partially deafened by the concussion. When her vision cleared, Sarah realized that the grenade explosion had damaged some of her electronic equipment, but more importantly, it had also created an opportunity. The blast had disoriented several enemy fighters, giving her teammates a chance to counterattack. Despite her injuries and the ringing in her ears, Sarah picked up her rifle and continued engaging targets while simultaneously trying to restore her damaged surveillance systems. The final phase of the battle lasted only a few more minutes, but those minutes felt like hours to Sarah. Every shot had to count because they were running critically low on ammunition. Every decision had to be perfect because there was no margin for error. She found herself operating on pure instinct and training, moving and shooting with a fluidity that she had never achieved during practice sessions. When the last enemy fighter finally fell, Sarah was surprised to realize that she had personally eliminated more than a dozen opponents during the course of the battle. The quiet computer specialist who had never imagined herself in a combat role had proven to be one of the most effective members of Alpha Squad when the situation demanded it. Her combination of technical skills, analytical thinking, and steady nerves under pressure had made her a formidable opponent that the enemy had never anticipated. As the rescue helicopters finally landed and medical personnel rushed to treat the wounded, Sarah was still working to extract critical intelligence from her damaged equipment. Even in the aftermath of the most intense experience of her life, her first priority was completing the mission and ensuring that the valuable information they had gathered wouldn't be lost. She had proven that she was much more than just a technical specialist. She was a soldier who could be counted on when everything was on the line. The extraction operation proceeded smoothly, with Alpha Squad and all the captured intelligence safely loaded aboard the helicopters within minutes. As they lifted off and headed toward the safety of their base, Sarah looked back at the battlefield, where she had discovered capabilities within herself that she had never known existed. The shy computer programmer was gone, replaced by someone who had proven herself in the ultimate test of combat and emerged victorious against overwhelming odds. The debriefing sessions after the mission lasted for 3 days, with intelligence analysts, military commanders, and technical specialists all wanting to understand exactly what had happened during Alpha Squad's operation. Sarah found herself at the center of attention in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable, but she recognized the importance of sharing what she had learned about combining technical warfare with traditional combat tactics. Colonel Martinez, who had originally recruited Sarah, was particularly interested in her electronic warfare achievements. The ability to take control of enemy communication systems and turn their own technology against them represented a significant advancement in military capabilities. Sarah's techniques had not only saved Alpha Squad, but it also provided valuable intelligence about enemy communication protocols that could be used in future operations. But it was the combat aspects of Sarah's performance that surprised everyone the most. The after-action reports showed that she had eliminated more enemy fighters than anyone else on the team, despite having no previous combat experience. Her shooting accuracy was exceptional, with a hit rate that exceeded what most experienced soldiers achieved in training exercises. Military psychologists wanted to understand how someone with no background in violence could perform so effectively in the most stressful combat situation imaginable. Sarah struggled to explain her own performance during the debriefing sessions. She didn't feel like a hero or a warrior, and she certainly didn't enjoy the violence that had been necessary for survival. When pressed by the psychologists, she described her combat experience as being similar to solving a very complex technical problem under extreme time pressure. Each shot had been a calculated decision based on threat assessment and tactical analysis, not an emotional response to danger. The intelligence gathered during the mission proved to be even more valuable than originally expected. Sarah's electronic surveillance had captured detailed information about terrorist communication networks, operational procedures, and planned attacks that helped prevent multiple civilian casualties in the following weeks. The technical methods she had developed for intercepting and manipulating enemy communications were quickly adopted by other special operations units. Within a month of returning from the mission, Sarah received notification that she was being considered for several military decorations, including the Bronze Star for Valor in Combat. The recognition made her uncomfortable because she didn't feel like she had done anything heroic. From her perspective, She had simply used her skills to solve problems and protect her teammates, which seemed like the obvious thing to do in the circumstances. But her teammates saw things differently. Lieutenant Morrison recommended her for promotion and assignment to a special technical warfare unit that was being formed specifically to exploit the new capabilities she had demonstrated. Sergeant Santos told anyone who would listen that Sarah was the best soldier she had ever served with, regardless of background or training. The other members of Alpha Squad requested that she be permanently assigned to their unit for future missions. The attention and recognition created new challenges for Sarah. She was suddenly being asked to train other technical specialists in combat skills, develop new electronic warfare techniques, and participate in planning sessions for operations that were far more complex and dangerous than anything she had previously imagined. The military wanted to create an entire program based on her unique combination of technical and combat abilities. Sarah found herself torn between conflicting emotions about her new role. On one hand, she was proud of what she had accomplished and satisfied that her skills were being put to good use protecting innocent people. On the other hand, she was disturbed by how easily she had adapted to combat and concerned about what that might mean for her future. The person who had emerged from that hillside firefight was fundamentally different from the quiet computer programmer who had first joined the military. The psychological evaluation sessions were particularly challenging. The military psychologists wanted to understand whether Sarah's combat effectiveness was a unique individual trait or something that could be replicated in other technical specialists. They conducted extensive interviews, psychological testing, and even brain imaging studies to try to identify what made her different from other people with similar backgrounds. What they discovered was that Sarah's analytical mind, which had always been her greatest strength in technical work, was also perfectly suited for combat situations. Her ability to remain calm under pressure, process complex information quickly, and make rational decisions without being overwhelmed by emotion made her an ideal soldier. The same qualities that had made her an excellent computer programmer had also made her a deadly fighter when the situation required it. But the psychologist also identified potential risks in Sarah's psychological profile. Her ability to compartmentalize violence and treat combat as a technical problem might protect her from immediate psychological trauma, but it could also lead to longer-term issues if she didn't properly process the emotional aspects of what she had experienced. They recommended ongoing counseling and careful monitoring of her mental health as she continued her military career. The recommendation for ongoing psychological support actually came as a relief to Sarah. She had been struggling with disturbing dreams and unexpected emotional reactions since returning from the mission, but she had been reluctant to admit that she was having difficulty adjusting. The military's recognition that even the most successful soldiers needed help processing combat experiences made it easier for her to accept the support that was being offered. As the weeks passed, Sarah gradually came to terms with what had happened during the mission and what it meant for her future. She realized that she had discovered capabilities within herself that she had never known existed, but she also understood that those capabilities came with responsibilities. Her unique combination of technical and combat skills made her valuable to the military, but it also meant that she would likely be called upon for increasingly dangerous missions. The decision about whether to continue her military career or return to civilian life wasn't easy. Sarah had originally joined the military for a specific purpose, and she had accomplished far more than she had ever expected. She could leave with honor and return to the comfortable world of computer programming and cybersecurity consulting. But she also knew that her skills could save lives and prevent terrorist attacks if she stayed and continued developing her capabilities. After long conversations with her family, her teammates, and the military psychologists, Sarah made her decision. She would stay in the military and accept assignment to the new special technical warfare unit that was being created. But she would also continue her psychological counseling and maintain connections with her civilian life to ensure that she didn't lose sight of who she had been before discovering who she could become. The transformation from technical specialist to combat soldier was complete, but Sarah understood that it was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The skills she had developed and the experiences she had gained would define her future in ways she was only beginning to understand. 6 months after the mission that changed everything, Sarah stood in front of a new group of technical specialists who were beginning their training for the experimental technical warfare program. Looking at their faces, she saw the same mixture of excitement and uncertainty that she had felt when she first joined Alpha Squad. These were brilliant programmers, cybersecurity experts, and electronics engineers who had volunteered for military service, but none of them had any idea what they were truly capable of achieving. The program that had been created based on Sarah's experiences was unlike anything the military had ever attempted before. It combined advanced technical training with intensive combat preparation, creating soldiers who could operate effectively in both cyber and physical battlefields. Sarah had been promoted to staff sergeant and placed in charge of developing the training curriculum, a responsibility that required her to think carefully about everything she had learned during her transformation from civilian specialist to combat soldier. The new recruits were remarkably similar to who Sarah had been before her first mission. They were intelligent, technically skilled, and completely unprepared for the realities of military life. Most of them had joined the program because they wanted to use their technical abilities to serve their country, but they had little understanding of what that service might ultimately require. Sarah's job was to prepare them for challenges they couldn't imagine while preserving the analytical thinking skills that made them valuable. Training the new technical warfare specialists required Sarah to relive her own experiences and examine them from a different perspective. As she taught classes on electronic warfare, combat tactics, and psychological preparation, she found herself understanding her own transformation in ways that hadn't been clear during the actual events. The person she had become wasn't just the result of combat experience. It was the product of discovering how to apply her existing strengths in completely new situations. The most challenging aspect of the training program was teaching the recruits how to make the mental transition from technical problem-solving to life-or-death decision-making. Sarah had to help them understand that the same analytical skills they used for debugging computer programs could be applied to tactical situations, but with consequences that were far more serious than system crashes or data loss. Some of the recruits adapted quickly to this concept, while others struggled with the moral and psychological implications of using their intelligence for warfare. During one particularly difficult training exercise, Sarah found herself working with a young programmer named Marcus, who reminded her strongly of her former self. He was brilliant with computers but completely overwhelmed by the physical and emotional demands of military training. After watching him struggle through a simulated combat scenario, Sarah sat down with him to discuss his concerns about whether he belonged in the program. Marcus expressed doubts that were identical to ones Sarah had experienced during her own early training. He worried that his technical skills weren't enough to compensate for his lack of combat experience, and he questioned whether someone with his background could ever become an effective soldier. Sarah listened to his concerns with understanding and patience, remembering how important it had been for her to have teammates who believed in her potential, even when she didn't believe in herself. Instead of giving Marcus easy reassurances, Sarah shared her own story honestly, including her fears, failures, and moments of doubt. She explained how the same qualities that made him an excellent programmer, attention to detail, logical thinking, and the ability to remain calm under pressure, were exactly the qualities that would make him a valuable soldier if he learned to apply them correctly. But she also emphasized that technical skills alone weren't enough. He would need to develop confidence, physical conditioning, and the mental toughness to make difficult decisions under extreme stress. The conversation with Marcus helped Sarah realize how much she had changed since her first mission. The shy computer programmer who had once doubted her own abilities was now confidently training others and helping them discover their own potential. She had not only mastered the technical and combat skills necessary for her role, but she had also developed the leadership abilities needed to guide others through the same transformation she had experienced. As the training program progressed, Sarah began receiving requests to participate in actual combat missions again. The success of her original operation with Alpha Squad had led to demands for her expertise in increasingly complex and dangerous situations. Military commanders wanted her to lead technical warfare operations, develop new electronic attack capabilities, and train specialized units for missions that combined cyber warfare with traditional combat tactics. The decision about whether to return to active combat duty was more difficult than Sarah had expected. She had found satisfaction and purpose in training new soldiers, and she was making important contributions to military capabilities without putting herself at risk. But she also recognized that her unique combination of technical and combat skills was most valuable in actual operations where lives were at stake. After discussing the decision with her family, her former teammates, and her psychological counselors, Sarah chose to accept a new assignment that would involve both training responsibilities and active mission participation. She would continue developing the technical warfare program, while also serving as a team leader for special operations that required her specific expertise. It was a demanding role that would require her to balance multiple responsibilities, but it was also an opportunity to make the maximum possible contribution to military effectiveness. The assignment came with a promotion to Sergeant First class and recognition as one of the military's leading experts in technical warfare. Sarah had achieved a level of professional success that would have been impossible in her previous civilian career, but more importantly, she had discovered a sense of purpose and accomplishment that went far beyond personal achievement. She was saving lives, preventing terrorist attacks, and protecting innocent people by using her abilities in ways that made a real difference in the world. As Sarah prepared for her new assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a quiet computer programmer to a combat-proven soldier and respected military leader. The transformation had been more dramatic and challenging than anything she could have imagined, but it had also revealed capabilities within herself that she had never known existed. The person she had become was stronger, more confident, and more capable than the person she had been, but she had also maintained the core values and analytical thinking skills that had always defined her character. The technical specialist who had once been just another member of the squad had proven that expertise, determination, and courage could overcome any obstacle. Her story had become an inspiration for other technical professionals who wanted to serve their country, and her methods had revolutionized military thinking about the integration of cyber warfare and traditional combat tactics. But for Sarah herself, the most important achievement was the knowledge that she had found her true calling and was using her abilities to protect the people and values she cared about most. The mission that had started as a simple surveillance operation had ended up changing not only Sarah's life, but also the future of military technical warfare. The quiet computer programmer had become a warrior, but she had also remained true to the analytical thinking and problem-solving abilities that had always been her greatest strengths. In discovering who she could become, Sarah had also learned who she had always been, someone capable of rising to any challenge when the situation demanded it.